You're listening to Not Just Hemingway podcast, the weekly podcast about short fiction from all around the globe. Let's keep it short. Let's get started. Hi everybody, welcome to the show. If this is your first time listening to Not Just Hemingway podcast, then thanks for coming. I'm Dieuwke, and today it's Bunmi and me in the studio. Sounds easy enough, but we both had to fly in for this one, so thank you for being here, Bunmi.
You're welcome.
Let's talk short stories. What have you read recently?
I've just finished Denis Johnson's Jesus' Son, which is a collection of short stories. An incredible book, just really sparkling prose. And I would have to say it's one of the best collections that I've ever read.
Really?
Yes. Denis Johnson also writes poetry, and that is evident just in his prose. The poetry in his prose is really, really beautiful. The stories are kind of interlinked in that the characters reappear.
Wait, because... Let me check. I honestly think I read a review the other day. Yes, I read a review the other day because it's been translated into Dutch. And guess what? It's sold as a novel in Dutch.
But it's not a novel.
I kid you not. It's sold as a novel, and if I check the website of the publisher that has it, it avoids both the words novel or short story.
Okay, I mean that's quite
weird.
That's quite interesting. That's quite interesting. It features the protagonist or the narrator is a drug addict, and
like he was himself, right?
I'm not sure. But the protagonist narrates all of the stories in the collection. So in that sense, you have that kind of continuity. But there are different characters in the different stories, and they're more like moments. And it is quite interesting because the character has, his drug addiction makes him or gives him a certain lucidity, a clarity, but also confusion.
So super unreliable.
Yeah, but you have that interesting kind of juxtaposition of clarity and confusion. Dealing with a lot of illusion and things that aren't real, and then having this incredible grasp of reality, and that's such an interesting balance. For me, it read as a collection of short stories, interlinked because the characters reappeared.
It is in English. I've checked it. In English, it's a collection of short stories. It's funny how they weird. It's funny how apparently, at least in the Netherlands, short stories don't sell, or are set to don't sell that well. And maybe that's just like a reinforcing of things. Would you have picked it out if it had been sold as a novel to you? If you knew? If it was a novel and you knew it was a novel, would you have picked it off the shelf?
Probably not. I mean, I read a collection of short stories edited by Haruki Murakami about birthdays. And Denis Johnson had a short story in that collection called Dundun, which is an amazing short story. And Dundun itself, the title really attracted me because Dundun is the name of an African drum, a Yoruba drum. And I just thought that's a really, really interesting title. And so read that short story, and then read that short story was part of this collection. And that is what brought me to the collection. I'm quite a slow reader, so...
Oh, really?
Yes. I'm a slow thinker,
This is lost
speaker.
to people who listen, but you don't look like a slow reader. You look like very much on top of it.
Well, I am on top of it, but I'm a slow reader. And that's not a negative, it's just a way of reading. And I'm a slow thinker and speaker. So it would take me, I'd probably only be able to get through maybe 3 novels, maybe a few more, but reading short stories just means I can read more. I can
diverse.
Study more. Yeah.
I get it. Do you have a sort of to be read list? Like, do you keep as now? So you had an anthology of some sorts, and then you found this dun story. So you set out. Do you do that often? Is that the way you find new short stories?
I tend to make a list. So I have a list.
Paper?
Yes, a paper list.
A paper list.
And I have to, get with the times and
No, you don't have
get
to.
myself a tablet. But I have a list, and I find that to be a really good way of just kind of, making sure that I read, an array of short stories. Otherwise, I would probably tend to go back to the same kind of short story. And I want to be a bit more diverse. I want to hear and read stories from different parts of the world. I have to say that I am focusing on women.
Ah.
I am focusing on women.
Ever since when?
Ever since kind of looking at the list and realising that the writers were women.
So my assumption is, but now I might sound, Denis is a guy, right?
Yeah, but he wasn't necessarily on my list. He wasn't on my list of short story
I
writers.
love people who hold lists, but are flexible enough to just ditch the list.
I mean, I don't, stick to the list rigidly. I don't do that.
Fair enough.
I love going into bookshops. I love Waterstones in London, and I love the smell of books. And I might pick up a book, come across it, and it happens to be a short story collection. Sometimes it happens like that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I find a story in a collection, as I found Denis Johnson's story. Sometimes the collection comes from the list. So, short story collections come to me in a variety of ways, I guess.
Okay. There is, desperately trying to find, as long as you're talking about desperately trying to find the name, there's there's more reading challenges. Like towards the end of the year, you always have, next year, try to read more female, more, I don't care, stories about kittens, about women with 3 legs, anything. There's a reading challenge for it. And I think Penguin also actually had one where they say, try read something from another continent, try read one story with a protagonist dying or with, topics both as well as from authors, which is pretty cool. I've actually, a couple of years ago, I had one that I tried to follow, and it was a bit of a challenge. Now, obviously, not just Hemingway, sort of started with the idea of me setting out to have a to-be-read list because... Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago, half a decade ago, this sounds horribly old, I went to the Writers Academy, and in the first year, part of the application, I think, I had to write down 40 books, wow. 35, 45, I don't know the exact number, but say 40 books, that I wanted to read in order, for my project. Mm-hmm. And I never thought of reading like that. I just never thought of it. And it's pretty obvious. And, the writers that we have in studio, mm-hmm. they do say that, and over the years, it's obvious. Like, you want to build a house, so you get a book on how to build a house.
I love that idea.
But then I thought it is actually pretty random. You walk into a bookstore, and whatever is on display, is on display. Mm-hmm. Meaning thousands of books are not on display, and you tend to ignore that. So ever since, I've been really trying to do well, and not just Hemingway. It was sort of a result of that, of trying to read one short story of every single country in the world. I'm ticking boxes there. It's a mission.
That is spectacular.
I'm not yet there. Anybody listening, I'm really needing a story from Paraguay. I just realized. We just, outside of the podcast, we just discussed about Polish short stories. And I was like, oh yeah, I've done that, but Paraguay and Panama is still...
But I love the idea of reading a short story from every country in the world, or trying to. I think that's fantastic.
And so, but you said you do a deliberate, ditchable effort to just read females. Why?
It's not that I am sticking just to females.
No, that's what I said with the ditchable.
Yeah. It's for some reason, my eye and my ear is being drawn to women writers, and I mean. Irenosen Okojie, her collection, Speak Gigantular, Leone Ross, Come Let Us Sing Anyway, Kathleen Collins, Whatever Happened to Multiracial Love. So I think when I was like in my teens, I sought out black women writers. I sought them out. But then I read mainly novels and poetry. And in the last couple of years, I've kind of fallen in love with the short story form. So I want to kind of go back to reading the stories of women and also the stories of women of colour. I'm not quite sure what that's about. I think maybe that's just something intrinsic in me that I'm doing as a writer, that I'm doing as a reader, that I'm doing as a black woman.
So you keep a list of things you want to read. Do you also keep a list of things you've read? Like, are you on Goodreads, for example?
I'm not on Goodreads, but I've heard good things about it. I've heard good things about Goodreads.
See, I'm just thinking, because I have been for a while, because I find it... this is really bad. You know, they'll go like, oh, there's this one story. Oh, just you. Like, have you read a poly story? And I'm like, and I have to look it up.
Yeah.
And I like that part of Goodreads. Plus, for me, if I'm listening to podcasts, not my own obviously, but other podcasts, I'll be like, and I'll have Goodreads open and I just fill it in and it doesn't get lost in little paper things. I was just thinking maybe I should have not just Hemingway reading list on Goodreads. What do you think? Should I not? Taking votes.
I really like the idea of Goodreads because it's a way of being exposed to short stories and short story collections that you probably wouldn't pick up or wouldn't.
Yes,
do you know what I mean?
There's a lot of
Immediately
algorithms in there. It's a really easy way. I think internet in general, despite the algorithms, I think internet in general is a very easy way to jump outside your algorithm because it's really easy to just go and scroll. I've had this thing with writing from the Middle East. I've actually had it for a long time, and it's there. It's not in the shops that I encounter, and you know I've happened to have lived in a couple of countries in the last couple of years, and just not there, but it does exist, and quite a few are translated as well. And Goodreads makes it really accessible
yeah.
to just find any author and then just click through, follow links, and before you know it, you're in a different bubble altogether.
Do you find that, because we were having a conversation a bit earlier on about writers from different parts of the world, writers from different countries, and how different environments or your environment as a writer impacts on your writing, in that it maybe colours your language, and you might, as a writer, you know, be informed by that or consciously be working to write something very different from where you are or where you come from.
Yeah, I'm thinking of all the different, because obviously I said I try to read one short story from different parts of the world. Yes, I think that is true. But it's also part of culture for the reference of the Middle East. And I'm no expert, you know, this is just purely because I have an interest in it. It's far more lyrical, I'd say. And I obviously read in translation. My Arabic is non-existent. You know, inshallah is the only thing I can say. So in translation, you feel that there's a different rhythm that should be there. Whereas Hemingway, it's pretty short, you know. And in Dutch, which you don't read, but I do, is same. It's shorter, factual sentences. Seem to be preferred over the long rhythmic. Lyrical, taking left
Poetic.
and right. Yeah. So yeah, I guess so. I'm actually thinking, I tend to write letters when I'm on holiday. It's really weird.
To yourself? Or?
No, that would be. Do people do that before I judge anyone? I was like, well, that would be weird. No, but it's nice to get like an old-fashioned, you know, meal, and it's not being the tax or something else. And it tends to. And I have this one friend. She's South African, and I have this one friend. She always gets these letters, and they tend to be long, because my holidays tend to be, you know, somewhere surrounded by green. So it tends to be more exploring, and so yeah, I guess so. So what region in the world do you read most?
I don't think that there is a particular region. So on my bookshelf of short story collections, there is Jhumpa Lahiri, Asian Indian, Yun Lee, Chinese. The writers that I mentioned before, one of whom is Jamaican British, the other one is African American. So I don't think that I'm kind of, you know, just reading books from a particular region.
But can I interrupt? Well, I've already done that. I've already done that. But those are writers writing in English. Or maybe Chinese, maybe not. But, African-American, Jamaican, Indian, they're most likely not translated. Do you know if you read books in translation?
That's a really good question, actually. I don't. I mean, but they're in English, but they're very, very different stories. They're very, very different stories.
True, but I assume, this is an assumption, you should go home and check and let me know, because I assume those are originally written in English. And that's why they might have been published. I mean, Jhumpa Lahiri obviously not, but they might have been published in their region. And because it's English, it's much easier to distribute. Whereas the Polish story or the Benin story I'm also still looking for, because they're written in a different language and it's so small, somebody has to go and translate it. So there might not be a bigger market for that. I'd be interested to know that.
You're also saying something about the kind of, or maybe you're not, the English language and the kind of, how can I put this? The kind of monopoly that the English language has. Do you know what I mean? In terms of literature.
Ooh. So this is all this politeness now going around these microphones, because the less polite opinion. No, you're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. Particularly because you're talking from the centre. I think always that Margaret Atwood said it at some point, that it's really easy to assume the world is like you when you're in the centre, and as a native English speaker, you're in the centre.
Yeah.
So yes. However, when you do go and find yourself on the other side of the world, and
you're no longer in the centre.
Yeah, and you turn on the news, and it turns out that things that you have been worrying about for maybe 25 years of your life have no significance in the place that you are. Or even completely, people are unaware of that. So yes, I would say you're completely right, and yes, it's dominant because there's also books are made into films, and but there's Nollywood, which is still Nigeria, still English, and and there's a big Hindi market. Bollywood. There's Urdu has lots and lots and lots of languaging. We just don't know. So I tend to say yes, but at the same time, I'm not sure there.
I find it quite interesting that that which is not European, that which is not English, is kind of defined as being in the margin. They are stories that live in the margin.
But look at South America. I mean, it's a continent so full and so rich in culture.
Yeah.
And, and they...
The question is whose margin?
Voila. Which is French, by the way. Sorry.
I speak a little.
I'm just teasing you. All right. So what do you plan on reading next?
I'm going to... I have not yet read any Ali Smith. And I am on a mission to read some of her work.
Ali Smith. Thank you for listening to Not Just Hemingway, the podcast about short stories from all over the world. Come back often and feel free to subscribe or add the podcast to your favorite RSS or iTunes. Visit www.notjusthemingway.com for show notes. You can also follow Not Just Hemingway on Twitter and Facebook.